Okay, again, just a very short, short view of the class. This time I will not hit the wrong button. I will hit the right button, and there we are. Okay, got that out of the way. Okay, we are in Luke chapter 19. Last week and the week before, they skipped ahead because it was Palm Sunday and then Easter Sunday. And dealt with those topics. Now we skip back again to Luke 19, which is before Palm Sunday happened. And this is, we're going to be looking at the first 10 verses of that chapter, which is a really short lesson, you think, but there's a lot in it. It's the story of Zacchaeus.
Joe,
Yes.
this is going to be taught in Awanas this week. Zacchaeus.
Well, it's good timing then, because here it is. Of course, everybody knows the song.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say. It's going to be like a song.
It's going to be like a song. But Jesus, someone, well, let me see, where do I start? It's kind of interesting because Luke writes his gospel in very elegant Greek. But this passage, these 10 verses, the commentators say that the syntax of this passage is Hebrew. And the theory is that Luke was actually incorporating an account that had been written in Hebrew by a Jewish person, and he incorporates it into his account of the life of Christ. At the beginning of the gospel, Luke makes the point that, I'm writing this because I've had very careful investigation of the facts. And so Luke was a historian in the tradition of Herodotus, and very methodical. And somehow he gets a hold of this Hebrew account of this episode and incorporates it into his gospel, because this is the point in time in which this happened. So that's just kind of Trivial Pursuit type of stuff. It doesn't really change anything as far as what is taught here, but it's kind of interesting to see how the Gospels came together and how Luke used a variety of sources and just kind of synthesized them into a single account. And we'll start with verse 1. Someone read verse 1, very short verse.
Then Jesus entered and passed through Jericho.
Okay. Jericho, yeah, it was short. Of course, Jericho in the Old Testament, Joshua and all of that. But it had a long history. Jericho might be one of the oldest cities on earth. It was destroyed. It was a Canaanite city. It was destroyed under Joshua.
Older than Persia?
Well, Persia is a country. Jericho is a city.
Shiraz is the first place.
Well, I don't know. It was around a long time.
Just throwing it out there.
Joshua put a curse on Jericho, but there was a guy in the time of King Ahab who rebuilt the city and incurred the curse on his life. But it was rebuilt then. But that was 1,000 years more in the Old Testament. By the time of Christ, Jericho had been rebuilt in a slightly different location. They weren't on the same exact ruins. And it was a flourishing city. There were a lot of nice buildings there. It was known for its palm trees. Matter of fact, one of the names of Jericho is the City of Palms. They produced balsam, myrrh, dates, all of that sort of thing. But more importantly, Jericho was on intersection of some trade routes. And pretty much anything coming from the east side of the Jordan was going to go through Jericho. From Jericho, it would either go up to Caesarea, down to Egypt, that area. So there was a lot of coming and going. There was a lot of wealth changing hands. Because Jericho was such an important place on trade, it was one of the 3 regional tax centers for the Romans in Israel. Because there was a ton of stuff coming through, and all that stuff, you could tax it when it passed through Jericho. So it's about 6 miles from the Jordan, about 15 to 20 miles from Jerusalem. And you've got all this stuff coming in from the east, going out, and it's a wealthy city, but there were all kinds of people are living there. This would have been the run up to Passover, and so there would have been a bunch of people coming through. But then this day, there were even more people coming through because Jesus was passing through. And he is creating a stir. Because and if you look back in chapter 18, in going into Jericho, on the way into Jericho, he had healed a restored sight to a blind man. And the crowd saw it, and it created an enormous interest. And so he's going through Jericho. He's just passing through. He's on his way to Jerusalem for the last time. He is going to pass through Jericho. He's going to go to Jerusalem, and he's going to have the triumphal entry. He's going to be crucified, and so really his public ministry is pretty much over. He is now going to the cross. So that's the scene. It sets the scene in verse 1. Interestingly enough, Jericho had the rabbis say that there were a lot of priests living in Jericho. It was I don't know why they did it, but I guess because they just liked it.
It's like New York City, right?
Well, it might have been. It was a significant place. Now, verse 2, we've got the place. Now, verse 2, we're going to talk about the man. Someone read verse 2.
There was a man named Zacharias, and he was chief tax collector, and he was rich.
Okay.
So he was the boss of Matthew.
Well, Matthew was in Capernaum, this different
his chief-
jurisdiction. Well,
his
he would
chief
have been
is-
a chief in that area.
That area.
Yeah. And that's all Luke really needs to say to sum this guy up. It's very interesting. He was Jewish. A lot of people tried to make him, and a lot of commentators have tried to make him a Gentile, but the name Zacchaeus is the Greek form of a Hebrew name, Zakkai, which means pure. Now, some decades before this day, a Hebrew man and a Hebrew woman had a baby boy, and they named him Pure, which is ironic, because here he is as a man, and he is not only a tax collector, but he is the chief tax collector. Now, we've talked about the Roman system of tax collection before. They had a system that was called tax farming. And they would go to a local person, and they would enter into kind of a independent contractor situation, where this person the deal was you go out and you collect the taxes that are owed by Rome, or to Rome, and anything that you collect over and above what you have to remit to Rome, you can keep. And if anybody gets you in trouble, we'll back you up. Now, that's the deal. And the guy that entered into the contract with Rome was called the Mocus. But quite often, the Mocus didn't want to dirty his hands with the actual collection of the tax, so he subcontracted it out to people who would actually do the dirty work. And they were called the Little Mocus, and he was called the Great Mocus.
It's like the mafia.
Well, it could be. It could almost become that way. Because the taxes were such that there wasn't, you didn't send in a tax return to the IRS and they have people in rooms with calculators and everything like that. This is a lot looser. There was a lot of latitude for the tax collectors to extort and change the rules and say people owed more than they did and things like that. And here is Zacchaeus. He is the great Mocus of Jericho, which is already a headquarters for the Roman tax system. All this stuff flowing through. He's got these people who are out there working for him, and they're getting their cut, but they're passing it on up to him. So when Luke says there was a man named Zacchaeus who was the chief tax collector, and he was rich, that's about all you need to know about him. He was a person who would have, in spite of his name, in spite of the hopes of his parents that were centered in that name, he was a person who had sold his soul to the oppressor. He was not a person who anybody would want to associate with. He couldn't go to synagogue. He was an outcast. He had traded his spiritual and social heritage for money. Okay, so you know the city, you know the man, but something is strange about Zacchaeus. Jesus is coming through the crowd. He's coming through Jericho. He's heading, got his face set toward Jerusalem. He's got all this crowd and everything like that. And here is Zacchaeus. Someone read verse 3.
He was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able because of the crowd, since he was a short man.
Okay. He's got a problem. He wants to see who Jesus was. Now, we don't, you can try to kind of put in any kind of motive of why he wants to see, but he wants to see who Jesus was. That is to say, he wants to see this person that's coming to the crowd. First of all, he wants to see which one Jesus is, because there's a lot of people. He wants to see what manner of man he is. He has a curiosity that he's interested in this person who is, people are saying he's a prophet. Maybe he's the Messiah. He did this. He restored the blind man and all of this sort of stuff. By this time, everybody probably had heard about that he had raised Lazarus from the dead. And so he's a notable man, possibly as much as any time during his ministry. Zacchaeus certainly has heard of him. He certainly has heard that he's passing by. He wants to see him.
Well, you can also say he was worried about his business.
Well, I don't know.
He's coming here, Jesus coming here, store up, the people not gonna pay taxes.
Well, he's just gonna pass through, though. I mean, this, and Zacchaeus has a problem, though, because Zacchaeus was a wee little man, and a wee little man was he. He's got short man syndrome. I don't know. But he can't see because people are lining the way. Zacchaeus is attempting to get a glimpse of Jesus, to get a look at him. And the verb is a continuous verb, which means that he was continuously trying to see, but he can't. Everybody's in front of him, and I guarantee you, nobody is going to step aside and let this guy through. He can't, he's not going to be able to go up to somebody and say, "Excuse me, could I please step in?" They would look at him and spit on him or something like that. So here's the problem. Here's the solution, verse 4. Someone read verse 4.
So we ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way.
Okay. He has a solution, and it's one of these ideas that just pops into your head and you just act on it. But here comes Jesus from coming from the right or left or whatever, moving toward Jerusalem. The crowd is filling in along the road to see. He knows which way Jesus is coming, so he runs ahead of the crowd where there's nobody lining the street. And he climbs up into this tree. Sycamore. Now, that's not the kind of sycamores that I'm used to seeing along a creek bank in eastern Oklahoma. This was called, they call this an Egyptian fig, sometimes a fig mulberry. It has a thick trunk and low spreading branches. If you're Zacchaeus' size, you can't climb a pine tree, okay, or anything like that. He gets up in these low branches and he's able to perch up through there. This was toward Passover, so there would have been some fresh green foliage out there. And so you got to get this in your mind, this little guy dressed in all of his finery, sitting perched on one of these low-hanging branches, kind of looking out through the leaves. This tells me something about Zacchaeus. Some of the commentators say, well, he was just doing this out of curiosity. Listen, this guy's got something going on besides mere curiosity. If it was mere curiosity, when he ran ahead of the crowd, all he would have to do is run ahead of the crowd and park himself on the side of the road. And he's there. He crawls up in that tree. Something is going on inside him. He doesn't just want to see Jesus because he's curious. He wants to see Jesus. And he is running the risk of, this was an undignified thing for a grown man to do. He's risking ridicule. He's risking the loss of his dignity. And it just shows that there is an intensity in his actions, that he is going to see Jesus come what may. Now, you tell me, what do you think was going on inside this guy that made him act this way?
Does it want it to be noticed by Jesus? Because now we're reading it in the Bible now.
Of course, he's up in the middle of those leaves.
Yeah. But
I
he
think
tell
he's
him to
been
come
touched by
down,
the Holy
Jesus.
Spirit.
I'm sorry?
I think he's been, Holy Spirit.
Okay.
He's seeking.
And I think with being the chief tax collector, he's ostracized himself so much from society and everything. He's lonely. And he's heard all these miracles that Jesus has done. And he's thinking, maybe he could do something for my life.
And what would he have recognized about his life that needed
He might have
fixing?
been as honest as he needed to be as a tax collector, so he's looking for forgiveness.
Yeah.
Okay.
Possible.
Anything else?
I think it's compelling that he desperately wanted wealth. Once he got all this wealth, he started, recognizing the power of that ostracism, that he wanted to must have wanted forgiveness for this, like you said, the criminal activity that he engaged in the collection of taxes. And so when he's perching up in that tree, he has to be thinking how much he'd like to be in fellowship, back with
Yeah.
God's people. And then here's Jesus who's healing the blind man, and and there's isn't that the story that's right before this?
Right.
And so and then like you said, Lazarus had been risen from the, so he knows that this miracle worker is happening, and here he is. He wants to be back to he realizes now that he's given up his Jewishness by being a Roman tax collector, that he wants that fellowship back. And here's this new king coming back. And so it's such a compelling thought that the thing that he needs most is community. And then Jesus is going to tell him, come down from that tree because I'm coming to your house. And that would have, in his state of being ostracized by all his people, he would have, because it's not just it's social, but it's also political and every aspect
Well,
of his
even
life.
entering the temple, the people would
Yeah.
ostracize him.
So
from
he
the
wasn't
temple.
allowed, and then the social, he's seen as a political traitor to be, and of course the Romans, he's not a Roman, so he's an outsider to the Romans, so he's got nothing. So just like when Jesus puts his hand on that leper and heals him, the touch was part of what Jesus did for him, not just the physical healing, is that person was longing for the touch. Zacchaeus was longing for fellowship, and a meal is, I think it says this importantly about how intimate a meal would have been in that culture. That this was a big deal to go to someone's house.
And don't you think by now he already heard the story of Matthew, his tax collector now become follower?
Possibly.
Yeah, that's true.
Mhm.
I wonder if he realized that this was the Messiah. Did he have a family that was Jewish and in the scriptures? A lot of possibilities.
Well, he would have heard people speculating, that's for sure. But I like what you said about the Holy Spirit because he realizes, just to put it simply, he realizes he's made a bad bargain. He's got everything that he went after, and what he had lost in getting it, indeed, what he had given away in exchange for it, wasn't enough to satisfy his spiritual needs and his social needs. So anyway, this is the man, this is the motive, this is where he is. He's perched up in a tree. Ridiculous sight to anybody that would look at him. But read verse 5.
When Jesus came to the place, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, hurry and come down, because today it is necessary for me to stay at your house.
Jesus is coming by the crowd. All Zacchaeus wants is to see him. Jesus stops and he looks up and he sees this little man sitting among the leaves on the branch of that tree. And he calls him by his name. How did Jesus know his name? This was unexpected, to say the least.
Yeah.
He calls him by his name.
That's
He stops and he looks up and their eyes meet and Jesus says, "Pure, hurry and come down. Because today I must stay at your house." That translation that you just read is absolutely correct. In the Greek word, it is necessary that I stay in your house. I have to stay at your house tonight. Why? Because he had an eternal appointment. God knew us from before the foundation of the world. But he comes to us at a day and time and leads us to faith in him. And today was Zacchaeus' day.
Another thing is, with all the people around him, I wouldn't tend to look up at a tree, because my
Right.
vision would be focused on the people around me, not looking up at a tree and
Right.
seeing a hand wave too.
I mean, you know, you look up in a tree and you see a bunch of leaves, now there's maybe a couple of legs sticking out and a face, I don't know, but you're right. And he would've been focused elsewhere, but no, he was focused on this man because this man had an eternal appointment with God and today was his day.
Grace.
Grace, yeah. And so, but he says, I have to stay at your house. Now, Jesus had eaten with tax collectors and sinners. And he got a lot of grief from the Pharisees for eating with them. This takes it a step further because he's going to stay overnight. He's making himself a house guest. Well, look at Zacchaeus' reaction, verse 6. So he quickly came down and welcomed him joyfully. Why did he welcome him joyfully? Because Zacchaeus, from this point, and we'll see later on, Zacchaeus is a forgiven man. And people don't, we're more sophisticated nowadays than we used to be, and we don't carry on and make loud noises and stuff like that. But I remember as a child being raised in churches up in the hills of eastern Oklahoma. Somebody got saved, and there was a hullabaloo about it. My dad's uncle got saved. This is back in the early 1900s. My dad's uncle went to church and got saved. They said you could hear him coming for a mile and a half. Well, maybe we've lost something. Maybe we just changed. But the joy is there. If you remember when you got saved, you remember a load being lifted. You remember something changing on the inside. And Zacchaeus came down from that tree as fast as he could and welcomed him. He received him as a guest with joy. And Jesus goes home with him. Now here's the reaction. There's always a reaction when Jesus does something like that, especially with regard to some of the outcasts in the world. There's always a reaction. All who saw it began to complain. He's gone to lodge with a sinful man. Not just the Pharisees, you note this? Everybody. Because Zacchaeus was everybody's enemy. He was everybody's whipping boy. He was an outcast, disliked by everyone. And so everybody started to complain. He's not just going to go eat with him, he's going to stay the night with the sinful man. And this word complain, I love this word complain, it's a Greek word. It's a word, one of these words that sounds like what it means, and it basically means to murmur or grumble. You could hear the crowd expressing its disapproval that this prophet, this possible Messiah, is actually going to stay with a sinful man. If he were doing the right thing, he would shun this person. If he were doing the right thing, he would treat him like scum. He would spit on him. He would or call down a lightning bolt or whatever, like that. But verse 8 begins, but in spite of what everybody said, someone read verse 8.
But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, "Look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor, and if I've cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount."
That's pretty incredible.
It's amazing after he invitation, or not invitation, going that day and confessed about his sin.
Yeah. Well, you can see the results of salvation. You can see he is doing something. He's not grandstanding. He's not doing it in order to be saved. This is the immediate work of God inside a person who has been redeemed from a life of sin. First of all, he starts by calling him Lord. And then he says, I'm going to give my half of my possessions to the poor. I mean, he was an enormously wealthy person. He's going to give half of it away to the poor. Talk about your stimulus plan. This was so over the top it was almost unheard of. But then, after stating he's going to give half of his possessions to the poor, out of the other half, if he's ever cheated somebody out of anything, he's going to pay back 4 times as much. The word extorted, my translation says, the word there means, it's the word false accusation, I can't talk today, false accusation. In other words, you would go to somebody that owed taxes and you would accuse them of cheating, or you would claim that they owed more than they did. And that was the way that they would falsely, wrongly take more than they were entitled to take so that they could keep it. And so that was a very common practice for tax collectors. And the word if doesn't mean that there's some doubt. We might say since or because. He had extorted things from people. He had used his position to cheat people and to take more than he was authorized to take. And he says, I'm going to give back those people 4 times as much. Now, you Old Testament scholars, does this 4 times as much have any significance from the Old Testament?
In Exodus, right?
Yeah.
Is that the law of Moses or?
Yeah. There's 2 things. In Leviticus, I think it's Leviticus, if you had wrongfully taken something from someone, you were supposed to restore it plus 20%. But in Exodus, the 4 times was what you were to restore if you had actually robbed somebody with violence. And I don't know whether he is saying that you know, what I've done to these people is the moral equivalent of strong-armed robbery, or whether he had actually, some of his minions had actually committed strong-armed robbery on some of these people. I don't know. But he is restoring, he's making restitution to the extent that was required of a thief or a robber.
It's surprising they haven't any record of people cheating after he said that.
Well, they had records. He could probably go back down through there and figure out pretty quickly who he was. But it's interesting to me to note that this suggests that Zacchaeus knows the law. You wouldn't think a tax collector would have any use for that, because it would just condemn him. Maybe he read that in the law somewhere, and maybe that's what got him started thinking. I don't know. But Jesus makes a pronouncement in verse 9 that I think he says it to Zacchaeus, but he says it loud enough to where he is also addressing the crowd, because he uses the third person as well. Jesus told him, today salvation has come to this house. To hear that from the lips of the Son of God must have been amazing. Because, you know, you can't see in my heart, you can't tell other than just looking at, listening to me and being around me and everything like that, whether I'm saved or not. Jesus knows. If he says you're saved, you're saved. And again, that today, you know, today I have to come to your house. Today salvation has come to your house. Because he too is the son of Abraham. Now that has two layers of meaning. Number one, he was a physical descendant of Abraham. He's Jewish. He should have been part of the Commonwealth of Israel. He should have been put in, you know, community with those people, which he had all forfeited. But he was still one of the children of Abraham. Then Jesus comes and presents himself to Israel, and this guy's a little part of Israel, even though he's forfeited that fellowship, he's forfeited that respect or participation. But on a deeper level and more important level, you go and Paul says that children of Abraham are who? Who are the true children of Abraham? People who are of faith. Because when was Abraham saved? Did God count him righteous? Abraham believed God, and it was counted to him for righteousness. And Paul says, so all who believe are children of Abraham in a spiritual sense. And so here's Jesus basically testifying that Zacchaeus has had a salvation experience where he has recognized his sin, he has placed his faith in Jesus, and those are the two requirements to be saved.
That reminds me of that, you know, when Jesus was on the cross and he tells one that today you will be
Yeah.
with me in paradise, the
Yeah.
same,
Yeah,
using the same words.
yeah. This is your day. This is the day you're the man.
Also, I think Zacchaeus did what he promised.
Oh, yeah, I mean, I don't think,
Otherwise, it wouldn't be here.
I have no doubt there was. As a matter of fact, who was it? Clement of, one of the early church fathers, Clement, claimed that Zacchaeus ended up as the pastor of the church at Caesarea. You know, that's church history. It's not inspired, take it or leave it, but he claims that he went on to become a leader in the church. But the bottom line of this whole account, and the reason that Luke puts it in here, is in verse 10. Someone read verse 10.
But the Son of Man has come to seek and save the lost.
And that's it. That's the bottom line. Why are you so interested in this guy? Why did you come to his house? Because the Son of Man has come to seek and to save the lost. This is a statement of the nature of God. God is by nature a Savior. If he condemns someone to eternal damnation, it is because of his justice. But he does so, you might say, unwillingly, because he would rather that person be saved. And Jesus Christ says he has come. This talks about his incarnation into the world. This is why he came. we talk about the meaning of Christmas and this, that, and the other. The meaning of Christmas is to be nice to each other. The meaning of Christmas is to give gifts and everything like that. The meaning of Christmas is that the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. And that word lost is a very interesting word. The pastor in his sermon talked about some of the names of Satan, and one of them he said was Apollyon, the destroyer. That's the root word used here. It basically means ruined, perished, undone, trashed, whatever you want to call it. He came to seek and to save those that were ruined by sin. And not so very long after this, he's going to do something about that sin by dying on the cross and rising again. But this was his message. He said, Jesus, why are you associating with this guy? Because that's why I'm here.
He said, I came to save the sinner. I'm not here to heal the healthy, I came to heal the sick.
That's it. He came for those who know that they are undone. And he did so in the tax collectors and the sinners. Luke 7:34, I love this. The Pharisees are after him again and everything like that. And their big accusation is he's the friend of tax collectors and sinners. Friend of sinners, what better title could you have? And that's Zacchaeus. And Luke puts it in here because Jesus, in this passage, reveals his very nature. He reveals the nature of God, and he reveals the very reason that he's even on earth. To seek and to save those who were ruined.
I mean, the whole imagery, I think, it's not the first time we've seen somebody hiding in shrubs in Genesis 3. I mean,
That's true.
we had the breaking of the fellowship of God.
That's
because
true.
Adam and Eve were hiding in the shrubs from God. When he called them forth, he broke the fellowship. And then you have this story where he's calling somebody else out of trees, and it's restoring the fellowship.
And even in Genesis 3, you have Adam, where are you? He comes looking for him by name. And that's another point here. We think of Jesus, well, Jesus died for sinners. He died for the world. I mean, everything like that. But he deals with people as individuals. And he called this guy by name. Nobody told him his name. I'm convinced. Jesus knew before he ever hit town that he had an appointment. Stayed at his house. He was the only one that knew, but he knew. So, the message for us who have been beneficiaries of that saving grace is to look for God's grace and look for God's mercy in some of the most unlikely places. Because those are the people Jesus came to look for and to save. And if we are his servants, if we are his brothers and sisters, if we are his representatives on earth, then that's supposed to be our attitude as well. And so that's what you can teach the children and your lesson. So Zacchaeus was a wee little man, but he, like the Grinch that stole Christmas, he grew 10 sizes that day. And that's all I've got on this passage. If anybody else has got any comments or questions.
Until the Bible shows Jesus went to the worst of worst to save, and they get eternal life because even prostitute the rock told him he said he was going to cast first a stone. That means everybody around you that are sinning in different way.
Right.
If you want a stone head, then you have to stone yourself too. That's why nobody left. A tax collector, the people that had disease on him, or even devil, been consumed by devil and all that, he saved all of them. So he touched every category. How worse this sin is, coming to Jesus by being cleansed.
But it seems kind of odd to say it this way, but these lowlifes and outcasts, they had an advantage when dealing with Jesus, and their advantage was they didn't have all of this phony self-righteousness that they had to go through to see him. They knew what they were. The society had, all their lives, society had spent their time telling them what they were. They knew they had nothing to offer, and that is the person that God can touch.
Well, I think Joe, in the scripture said in verse 6, so he quickly came down.
Yeah.
So that, that shows that he was desperate to get down there, because he knew he needed Jesus.
No hesitation.
Yeah.
No hesitation.
Yeah.
Okay, anything else?
Thank you, Joe.
Thank you, sir.
We're done, and I'm turning off the recording. Yes?
My last thought on this is because so many of us in our lives are presented with situations where, whether we're burdened from something we've done or we're inflicted, and we carry that so often. And that was relating to Pastor Gabbert's sermon this morning even, because you carry things for so long and so often, and it eats at you and it eats at you. But then when you recognize that calling, he was rich. He was, again, ostracized. But you become so lonely, which is where Satan wants to put you. He wants to back you away from everybody so that you are not in fellowship, and you're sitting there fighting that inner turmoil. And to be obedient to the calling and whatever brought him to that point, he's like, man, I'm going to see this guy because I am whatever curious or whatever, I've heard enough about him, maybe he can clean me up. And being willing to, as a very highly recognized person in society, to climb a tree in his fancy duds, and get up there, and it did not matter what people thought of him at that point. He was going to do what was necessary to be recognized by Christ and to be obedient to that calling in his heart. And it's just like so many times we battle just not doing that.
Oh, yeah.
I like what you said, because there's so many people, you think you're immune, and no one's immune. And going back to that sermon about the lion, like a predator. And those predators, they don't go after the herd. They go try to get one of them off by itself. And Zacchaeus and all that wealth got carved out by himself.
But they live so lonely. They live with such a void. You think that, you see all these people that have their wealth, they have whatever's been given to them or inherited, but they are so absolutely lonely and looking for something to fill that void.
And Zacchaeus could have resisted. He could have thought, there's, my dignity, my position, what will people think? Of course, people didn't think much of him anyway.
It makes you think of that old song, all to Jesus I surrender.
Well,
That's what he had to do.
Yes.
Yeah,
That money wasn't gonna fill that void.
well, the Holy Spirit called me weeks before I was saved. I had decided I didn't care what anybody thought, and I finally did. But I'm thinking 2, maybe 3 weeks, just battling it, and finally I was so tired of it. I went to church and I said, I'm not going to do anything today. I'm tired of messing with it. I'm just going to sit here. And that was what he called.
And you think of the ripple effect from all the people that saw this, and the change in Zacchaeus to being a man that steals their money that starts giving it back quadruple fold.
Oh, yeah.
Somebody in the Hebrew wrote the account, so that tells you it affected that person, whoever wrote the account.
Yeah. Well, I think,
Jesus got to gig those Pharisees one more time.
yeah, I think Zacchaeus is probably very shortly out of a job, but I'm going to turn the recording off right
Out
now.
of that job.